Ways wildlife supports healthy trees and forests. Trees depend on wildlife to disperse their seeds. When it comes to spreading their genetic material, trees definitely get creative. From hardy mangrove propagules that can live up to a year at sea, to explosive sandbox capsules that launch seeds at speeds of up to 160 miles per hour. To that end, many species have successfully lured other life forms into fulfilling their reproductive aspirations. One striking example of this can be found in Southeast Asia, where orangutans aid dispersal by eating fruits whole, then expelling the seeds in their droppings. In one study, scientists found 828 seeds in one fecal sample. And because droppings create a nice, moist environment for the digested seeds, successful germination is much more likely. Trees depend on wildlife to keep herbivores in check. In recent decades, scientists have found that large predators play an essential role in protecting the ecosystems they call home. How do they do this? By keeping voracious herbivores in check. Consider the story of the wolves in Yellowstone National Park. In 1920, they disappeared completely due to aggressive hunting, and the entire ecosystem suffered. For 70 years, elk herds increased their numbers exponentially by consuming the aspens, willows, and cottonwoods that lined streams. Vegetation declined and other wildlife species left. When the wolves were finally reintroduced, they kept the elks on the move, and as a result, the trees were able to recover. When the trees recovered, their roots stabilized stream banks and slowed the flow of water through the ecosystem. Then, the other animals came back. All of this was made possible by returning the wolves to their rightful place home. Trees depend on wildlife to control insects. Because trees can live for centuries, they spend their lives in the slow lane. This allows them to grow strong and steady, developing thick bark and intricate root systems and storing massive amounts of carbon. It also leaves them vulnerable to voracious insects who work their way up their trunks, into their bark, and to the tips of branches where leaves stretch towards the sun. Thankfully, birds often step in to help, in a symbiotic relationship that fills their bellies with much-needed protein and saves trees from being eaten by species like leafhoppers, caterpillars, and grasshoppers. Some birds, like chickadees, can consume up to 1,000 bugs a day. Trees depend on wildlife for pollination. We're all familiar with how vital bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds are to pollination, and, therefore, our entire food supply. But did you know that in some forests, four-legged creatures have taken on this vital role? In Australia, adorable mouse-sized honey possums drink the nectar of banksia and eucalyptus flowers. Their long noses get dusted with pollen while they feed, which is then passed on to the next flower they visit. Trees depend on wildlife to thin their ranks. In Central Africa, forest elephants eat thinner, faster-growing trees, making room for their slower, denser counterparts to grow and thrive. In turn, these slower, denser trees store massive amounts of carbon and provide other ecosystem services with less competition for resources from other plants. Some wildlife species actually germinate seeds while they digest. In Japan, bears help cherry trees by eating their fruit, germinating the pits inside their digestive systems, and then conveniently depositing them in piles of fresh fertilizer. Their stomach acids and digestive enzymes wear down the cherry's hard seed coats without harming the seeds, making them more permeable to water and, therefore, easier to sprout. Trees depend on wildlife to fix carbon and absorb nutrients. Trees everywhere depend on mutualistic relationships with mycorrhizal fungi. In return for protection within special mycorrhizal roots, the fungi procure scarce nutrients like phosphate and nitrogen and transfer them to their host tree. This, in turn, helps the trees to pull carbon from the atmosphere and transform it into sugars, energy, and oxygen. Without fungi, 85% of terrestrial ecosystems would be in serious trouble. Nature always finds a way, and if you look closely, you'll see that, in the forest, everyone from the biggest elephant to the tiniest microbe has something to contribute. Let's work together to plant trees and protect wildlife so that they can continue to work together to keep our planet green.